all of you being here again, and thank you. And with that, I'm going to introduce Fred Schroeder. Fred, like me, has a lot of gray hair, so that tells you he's been around a long time. And he's been doing trade spend for a lot of those years. So we're really excited to have Fred here with us today. He's going to share some of his expertise, thoughts, opinions, opportunities that he sees when young brands, and again, brands that are your size, are dealing and working through your trade spend activities, what to expect, what to think about. We're going to enjoy this conversation with Fred. This event is being recorded. Fred will make slides available to us afterwards. And certainly, if you have any questions about Brandjectory, it's easy to reach us, Tom at brandjectory.com, Susan at brandjectory.com, hello@brandjectory.com. All these will get us to you very quickly. And of course, we're on LinkedIn and you can connect with us. So I'll be excited at some point, hopefully, to meet all of you that I don't know. And for those that I do know, thank you again for being here. Thank you all for being here. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Fred. He's going to share his screen. He's going to get us started and perhaps share a little bit more about his background and his experiences with trade spend. So Fred, I'm turning it over to you.
Sounds great. Thank you very much, Tom. Let me just get it set up here. I'm assuming everyone can see that. The first thing I will start out with, though, is not to contradict you, Tom, but my 4-year-old grandson, every time I ask him, will tell me that my hair is brown. So
okay, all right.
My wife argues with him. My son argues with him, but he still thinks it's brown. So I'm going to go with that. Okay.
Okay. Well, maybe I can see him someday.
There you go. Okay, yeah. So when Tom asked me to do this a month or two ago, the thing that I thought about is well, if you have a group of people, what are some of the things that you want to communicate? And I think the key takeaway that I would suggest that as we start this out is that and just talking with a lot of founders and new stage brands, which I do on a regular basis, people do not view trade as number one, I think, as important as it really is to your overall business. And secondly, and I think most importantly, is how controllable it is. And it really is, it's a boatload of money, which we'll talk about, but it's also something that you control as you look to go forward. And when I say that, and I can go back to, which I'll talk about in a second on my background, but if you effectively leverage your trade spend, I can quantifiably say that you can increase your revenue by 20 to 40%, depending on where you are, what phase, and if that's not overnight, but it is over a period of time. Trade promotion has a major impact on your revenue and your profitable revenue. So with that, the agenda that's pulled together here has 4 topics. I'll just give you a very quick background on myself so you know who's talking at you for the next hour about your most exciting and loved subject. I'll talk a little bit about the trade promotion basics, just some of the core areas around that. We'll talk a little bit about trade promotion opportunities, and then at the end, maybe 6 or 7 suggested action steps that hopefully you can take away from this. As far as my background, I've spent over 20 years with national major brands. I was with P&G for about 5 years, about 100 years ago. And then I spent 18 years within the Minute Maid division of Coca-Cola. That was in sales management and management leadership within, Coca-Cola. And everything that I've done since about year 2 with P&G has involved trade. It's a significant amount of trade spending. For about the last 20 years, I've been involved on the solution provider area from the software side, which included 2 separate companies as both of their CEOs. I was involved in developing a solution from scratch with the first organization I was with, launching it and eventually restructuring that business. Prior to being CEO, that was it was in Canada's version of Chapter 11 and took it out of that. And then I was with a second other company. I've partnered over that period of time with well over 70 tier 1 and as well as mostly SMB brands, and worked with a variety of small and large brokers. I feel very close to the brokerage community. And in fact, with the first company I was with, we actually created a joint venture that existed for about 7 years, which was a subset of the trade promotion product, with Acosta sales and marketing, and worked with them for a period of years. So, I don't know a lot about, I fit into that category, I guess, where they say, what's a generalist? They know nothing about everything. I probably fit into the category of knowing a specialist where I know everything about nothing. So if I move into the trade promotion basics area, I looked at a couple of different facets here, which would be, first, it's a major priority, and it should be a major priority for a consumer goods organization. Secondly, it's an investment. It shouldn't be treated as an expense. It should be treated as an investment. We'll probably spend most of the time on the complexity factor here. And then fourth, it's a defined process. So really the way you work yourself through that is through a process. As far as it being a major priority, why is it a priority? First of all, it is over 25% of gross revenue. I get questioned on that every time it's stated on LinkedIn. There's an industry study. It's a trade promotion study from 1997 to 2023. Trade continues to go up, and it also goes up even more in periods where inflation begins to subside and prices begin to either stabilize and costs come down. In every period that's happened, it typically doesn't go down first via list price. It'll go down via increased trade promotion. So, that's probably something to think about as you look out into 2025 and potentially 26 as inflation subsides and we get back to a little more of a normal pricing situation. It crosses and touches all areas of your business. We'll touch on that a bit as we go through. Most brands cannot provide an accurate assessment either of what's planned or what's spent around trade within their business, and they certainly cannot do it at a very granular level. So if I asked, and maybe you can, it'd be excellent if you can, but if you can tell me what you're spending on a promoted group in a quarter, on a cost per case basis, or on as trade as a percent of revenue, you're well ahead of the game. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about this in some other areas, but accruals are really required in order to account for this properly and maintain your cash flow. We'll talk a bit about deductions, and I'm sure anybody that's on LinkedIn sees constant posts about how you deal with deductions. I mean, deductions are really the end of the process. So if you're accruing properly, deductions are really not going to be that big of an issue. Deductions have been around for, I'm going to say 40 or at least 40 years, and they're probably not going away in the next 3 to 5. Trade is probably the most ubiquitous area of your business as far as what it touches, and yet a lot of people don't provide the proper focus. If I move into it as being an investment, if you think about it, first of all, the retailer has the consumer's attention. If you go back a period of time when there was and I guess Tom and you and I might be the only two that remember when there were 4 television stations, but advertising was a primary vehicle. It's no longer a primary vehicle. There was a couple of articles recently about that on LinkedIn that were shared. But the store is really where a lot of the marketing gets done. And when you think about trade and what it impacts, it impacts your retail distribution. If you don't have trade allocated, you're not going to get your product on the shelf. It affects your everyday pricing. It affects your promoted pricing. It affects your ability to advertise with the retailer, whether that be within flyers and in-store vehicles, or that be with media that affects the purchase and pickup or purchase and home delivery. All that really can and does fit into the entire trade area. It affects your display support, digital coupons, essentially anything that happens around the consumer picking up a product in a store, other than packaging and other than just pure demand. It's touched by trade spending. And like I said, it continues to expand to out-of-store promotional opportunities, whether it be Instacart or at store pickup. It's a major driver of your trial and repeat. And if you're not selling in store, it's going to be rather difficult to maintain long-term distribution. It's complex. We'll spend some time talking about the complexity here. It's got numerous promotion types and numerous types of structures. There's various payment structures and formats. There's an exposure complexity to this. I won't touch on that. We'll talk about it. And then there's this fun thing that we refer to as distributor math, which is not to be confused with addition, subtraction, or any other type of math that most of us are used to. These, as you look at these complexities, they do need to be, which we'll touch on, developed and integrated into a well-defined process as you go forward, which is going to help you make that more successful. So when we think about promotion types, I tend to think about it in two buckets. You got what I would call working trade, which is performance-related promotions. You know all those. We don't need to spend a lot of time on those. There's scans, there's warehouse withdrawal promotions, which are less restrictive than a scan promotion. There's fixed fee lump sum events. There's slotting type promotions, which can come a variety of different ways. And there's also non-performance related promotions, which we would refer to as an off-invoice deal. Then you have areas that fit into the trade bucket. A couple of examples, not totally inclusive, but a couple of examples would be all the fees you wind up with. So if you have an MCB fee attached to a trade deal or a fee attached to a scan deal running back through a distributor, that fits into trade spending. Your food shows typically fit into trade spending. Things such as distributor allowances, the famous 2.5% that one of the distributors just came out with, would fit into trade spending. And, when you think about what the priority is, it would really be to focus the money that you're spending on targeted performance related events that are really based on what you're trying to do with your brand. So, when you think about this working trade, it's how you get most of your dollars into working trade and how you focus those dollars against doing what the objectives are for your brand. If I think about the two payment types, this one's pretty simple. It either comes off the invoice or it comes as a deduction. There are some deals and promotions occasionally where you'll be asked to submit a check. I don't know that it's as prevalent as it was a few years ago, but Ahold still does some prepay type of accounting, but that's not broad scale at all. So if you're looking at your business, you're either going to give a promotion off invoice or it's going to show up in the form of a deduction. As you look at this whole area, if I go to the third point, the area of trade exposure, and what do we mean by that? So your trade promotions are very typically aligned with a specific event. So let's take the example of buy one, get one. That's a specific event that you're spending dollars to get. Another example might be an off-invoice deal where they get that promotion, obviously, on 100% of the cases during the promotional period, plus obviously the opportunity to forward buy at the end. Back to the scan promotion, it may only be applicable to the units and the resultant cases or whatever your unit of measure is that move through to the consumer based on what's scanned during a specific period of time. And then another example would be a fixed fee or a lump sum fee that would have the cases applied to that during the period of time for the event. So if you were giving a retailer, say $2,000 for an ad that happened to be a scan promotion, that fixed fee would be spread across those units or cases, however you choose to measure your volume. And then the volume is captured either through shipments, which you would have certainly for an off-invoice deal. If you happen to be getting any syndicated data, it would come through that. Scan promotions will quickly show up on a deduction, can be validated by spins, but for the most part, we found that deductions are very close to accurate. And then this area, they're called a variety of different things, but warehouse withdrawal reports. So you might be selling to either a direct customer or a distributor, and you'll get the numbers on how many shipped out to a group of stores or individual stores that you can aggregate, but that shipped out from the warehouse into the stores for that period of time. It's not as comprehensive as a scan quantity in measuring consumer takeaway, but most people at a store level in this day and age are not looking to warehouse product there. There might be a little overflow, but that's typically gone the following week. If I think about complexity, and I'm going to give a couple of examples just to show the difference here, which I think is actually a pretty interesting view of how you should think about considering trade. So exposure is really the expense for budgeting, accruing, and validating your actual expense of trade. And for the purpose of this example, we'll take something simple. We'll take a brand that has a case cost out, let's call it a delivered case cost for simplicity, of $20 a case, has 10 units in a case, and sells 120,000 cases per year, which is obviously 10,000 cases a month. So if I think about an off-invoice deal, and the common term that I've seen on countless calendars is 15% off invoice a quarter, and it's 4 times a year. So if I think about the assumption, you might have a deal at 4 times a year, 15%. That 15% would happen based on simple math on 25% of your volume. If you sell one deal per quarter, at 15%, you'd end up with $120,000 worth of spending. The reality, though, is in virtually every case, there's significant forward buying. Unless you're selling a relatively short-coded perishable product, you're going to have significant forward buying. There also tends to be on the part of many distributors, some distributors, I shouldn't say many, some, that if they don't buy enough, they'll simply deduct the balance somewhere on an invoice and feel they're entitled to the 15% off invoice on everything they purchase. Keeping in mind that 15% is only reflected to the retailers during that 1 month per quarter. So if you think about the reality now and you take those cases, a brand might think they're spending $120,000 or something slightly more than that or more than that, when in reality, if those deals are being bridged, they're spending $360,000 a year just on an off invoice deal, with very limited, if any, performance happening on that deal. My humble perspective is, for a brand that size, that's a significant amount of dollars to be given away for very limited, if any, performance. In addition to that, you probably are driving some of your operations people crazy, or your co-packers crazy, or whatever, because you're forcing shipments over the course of a year into four 4-week windows. If I move to example number 2, and this will turn into a comparison very quickly, you hear about the expense of BOGOs and how expensive they are and how cost prohibitive they are, because after all, you're giving away a product. So let's take this same example and let's look at a brand that within those parameters has a average retail price of, say, $339, $337, $340 a unit. They're making 39% margin, just under 40% margin. And they're selling 2,500 cases a week. Let's assume, for argument's sake, that the BOGO is going to move 10 weeks volume, and that's what we're going to project on the first event. It might be more, it might be less, but for as an estimate, we'll look at this number to start out. Your retail price would be $1.70. Your required cost $1.70. Your required cost to get to that would be $120. Again, I used round numbers for the math, which is a 29% margin. As an example, the most prevalent BOGO retailer that I'm aware of is Publix, and Publix, 29% margin for a BOGO at Publix as of 6 months ago was a very acceptable margin. Your trade rate for that would be $8 a case. Your total trade on that volume would be $400,000. Okay, if you took your volume on the BOGOs at the number of cases, whatever, you have the volume, it's hidden behind my screen there, and you're spending a 400, so you're selling more volume at the 140 some, whatever it is, 140,000 cases. Your spending is $400,000, and your case rate is $282 per case. If I compare the two, I think an innocuous 15% OI that I'm running 4 times a year because it makes the distributors happy and I'm a preferred vendor with that distributor, we think that's very cost effective when I'm spending $3 a case on that on 120,000 cases. Where if I ran 2 BOGOs a year, I'd be selling 20,000 more cases and spending 18 cents a case less. It's a pretty dramatic difference when you look at two simple examples there. And again, that's totally due to the term I'd use, which is exposure complexity, right? So you have this exposure that somebody in your organization, my suggestion would be it's either sales or your broker, should be analyzing and figuring out as far as their promotional planning, and they should be looking at that and making those decisions and determining if a BOGO's on strategy, going and getting those. And if you're trying to work with a retailer and a retailer has a BOGO format, it's going to be in your best interest to partner with them if you know, at least for a limited number of those. The next area and the fourth area to touch on here is what I'll refer to as,
Buy one, get one. Huh?
I'm sorry, was that me back? Was that an echo for me? Distributor math is another example that has an impact on your list price and a major impact, I would say, on your trade spending. So distributors have, for reference, a cost plus distributor. And I'll use those as an example here versus other distributors that may not be in this situation, as well as direct retailers. But there are additional costs to make sure that you fit into your trade budget as you're accruing for trade and planning for trade as you go into a year. There's an upcharge on all promotions except OIs based on their cost plus format. So you might use an example of 20%. So if I go to this $20 case cost that we referred to before, and they have the 20% scan promotion may in fact be 25% more expensive on a cost per case basis. Again, we reference that there's fees attached to every MCB or deduction. The range varies. It can be as low as 5%. I've seen examples on certain events where it's up as high as 20%. And these fees, again, are trade expenses. Another, I would suggest, again, to come back to it, additional cost. OIs generally drive limited incremental volume or performance with significant costs. So as you think about this rolling up of the cost structure within a distributor, again, it's important to make sure that you budget and accrue for these going into it, because they are going to come back as deductions down the road, and they're in every contract. What is the effect on selling through one of these distributors, utilizing the distributor math, so to speak, on your everyday price? I have two segments here. You have the cost plus area on the left, and you have a direct retailer or a non-cost plus distributor on the right. And again, you have a $20 case cost. With a 25% upcharge to retail, it moves to $25. Your retail price at 34% margin would be $379. If I move over to the right to a direct retailer, same situation. List price is still $20 in revenue, and your retail price would be $299 at that same mid 30% margin rate. So there's a big difference there on what the consumer is going to see one way or the other, and it's just something to be aware of. If you looked at just the lower margin, in the event you wanted to look at it that way, you're still seeing a 70-cent price differential. So utilizing trade to impact that pricing would also be based on that cost plus factor. So if you look to bring your price down, say from $379 to, let's say you wanted to bring it down to $349 or 2 for $7 or whatever, that's still that price reduction is going to be based off the $25 list cost, not your $20 list cost. So again, it's important to make sure that you're planning on it at this level and accruing on it at this level, so it's not a surprise when a deduction comes in down the road. A dramatic impact here, I would suggest, would be on slotting. So We all hear the common term that when we come out with a new SKU or a new item, we're going to give away the equivalent of or one free case per store. If I look at that in the two scenarios, again, so you can plan on it and account for it, if I have the 25% upcharge to a retailer, the case cost goes from $20 to $25. On top of that free case, I'm going to add on my 10%, call it deduction fee or distributor fee on top of that. So now if I compare the two, my free fill charge at this stage of the game is $27.50 for a distributor compared to $20 at a direct retailer. If I happen to be giving a quarterly OI to the retailer, or to the distributor, that will come on top of the free fill and add another, in this case, $3 to that case cost. So your free case that you're shipping out at what you think is $20 with the OI added in and the fee added in and the upcharge to the retailer added in will become 30, 50 or over 50% higher than it would be as you're accounting for it and planning for it and accruing for it from a conventional or a direct retailer. If I happen to be adding a scan promotion on top of that, it's going to be significantly higher as well because I'll be adding the scan promotion onto a higher price as well as having fees on top of it. So again, my goal here, and I know I'm probably repeating myself and maybe putting a couple of people to sleep, but the importance here is to make sure that you're knowing exactly what your cost structure is on all these events so you don't end up with surprises at the end of the year. The conclusions for distributor math would be to understand your numbers. It's important. The distributor deduction should not be a surprise. They're known amounts for the most part. You should ensure that you're in control of your trade spending from budgeting through the entire execution. And again, every promotion has a contract attached to it. So your broker or someone is filling out a contract at your distributors and retailers for every one of these events. I would make sure that I have them all and have them all in a file to validate. The final area around the basics would be the clearly defined process. And it is a clearly defined process. And I'm going to start the process out by saying trade promotion does not equal deduction clearing. There are many people that view these as one and the same. What I would suggest is all deduction clearing should be is what I would refer to as doing the dishes. So where I draw that analogy from is right when you're planning something, figure an event. You don't sit around, let's say you're having people over for Thanksgiving or a holiday. You don't sit around and the first thing you say is, how are we going to clean up afterwards? Who's doing the dishes? No, you plan the event somehow at the end of a period of time. There's stuff to deal with. It gets organized. It gets put in the dishwasher. You agree that people, 3 people are going to clear the table. 3 people are going to throw things away. Somebody's going to take the trash out and somebody's going to load the dishwasher, right? That's deduction management. Everything should have a place and everything should know where it's going. And if that happens up front, all deduction management should be is matching, and now it's complicated, but matching the deductions to the activities that have happened. We'll talk about that with questions at the end. Sorry. If I move to the last topic, which is a trade process. The trade process, there's many ways of looking at it. Some do it in a chevron chart, some do it in a wheel, some do it in a pie chart. It's done a variety of different ways. But essentially the process is, and if you're looking at 2025, sometime in the next 3 or 4 months, your organization is going to set up a budget or a plan for 2025. It's going to include your volume, your revenue, your spending, which we'll get to. Then you'll talk about your customer planning. You'll break it down into a customer level. Then once that's all approved, you'll take it out to the customers for a long period of time. It could be from October. And if it's deals in next October, it could be a year or so that these deals are getting executed and potentially changed until they're confirmed or committed. Once the deal actually runs, it becomes settled, hence the deduction process. And then throughout this entire time frame and ongoing, you're analyzing it. What's working, what's not working, event by event, in aggregate, et cetera. So I would suggest that there's three standards. One is within the process, you as an organization determine your own objectives, you determine your own strategies, you determine your own structure around how you're going to address those. You are going to need people to work together to execute the process. You'll understand and need to figure out how to deal with some of your resource constraints, and you'll figure out how you're going to execute your tactical plans. I would suggest another key is consistency. It's complex and there's an overage. You could tip in any given year, you could be still clearing deductions from the prior year. You have your entire current year you're working on, and you're planning and setting plans in place for your next year. Your resources are going to change. People in this industry move around relatively frequently, and trade needs a constant focus. And with that, I'd strongly suggest leveraging the 80-20 rule. So, in virtually every company that I've worked with, there's a limited number of customers and promoted groups that end up doing the bulk of your business. I'd focus on the customers and promoted groups that make up the bulk of your volume. Within the annual planning activities, set your business objectives relative to trade. That would include your volume, your revenue, and your spending. Your year one is probably going to have some challenges, but it'll evolve in subsequent years. This is a marathon, not a sprint. You'll define your roles and responsibilities for sales and brokers. That's important. You'll determine the KPIs you're going to manage, and you're going to set your budgets. When you think about customer planning, you need to understand who's going to do what at the broker level and the sales organization level. Again, plan by promoted group and leverage the 80-20 rule. You should be planning and defining metrics at both direct and indirect retailers. Your approval process should stay within the budgeting guide rails you set up. Your initial forecast should be measured versus what comes out of the plan. And there should be regular meetings with finance, leadership, marketing, and operations to address. In execution, you should be any dollars you have out there should be getting confirmed with commitments and promotional contracts. As you revise plans, you should be revising them, but they should be getting reapproved if they change. You should be updating your forecast to track against your budgets and your initial plan. And again, you should be having ongoing reviews. Settlement, again, clearly defined internal and external roles and responsibilities. What's your organization doing and what might your brokers be doing? Ensure your commissions are tied to net revenue. There's typically a 4-step process. Once you match the deductions to promotions, you typically knock out about 3/4. All other fees and expenses are another 10% typically. Then you'll get your logistical deductions. The truck was late, it was 5 cases short, etc. You'll decide how you're going to address those, and then somebody goes back in and gets the 5% of that they deducted for that they had no business deducting for. And again, this should be reviewed with your customers and your brokers on a regular basis. Analysis, I'd suggest starting simple, identifying your customers and promoted groups, identify your key item launches so you can analyze those, report year over year, and look at a couple of key metrics, not too many: your rate per case spending, your trade as a % of gross revenue, and you can get into areas such as incremental cost per incremental case down the road. And on slotting, you should know when it's going to break even and what your cost per case is when over a period of months, so you know actually what you're spending. Some opportunities, and we're getting closer to the end. I would suggest that there's 4 major opportunities to think about. One would be dealing with your major distributors on the OIs, on the inordinate amount of fees and upcharges and how you address those and understand those. Accurately addressing your retail price. Various retailers get different prices. You probably have a targeted price you'd like to secure at a retailer level. There's ways to get to that point. Understand within your own organizations the complexity of distributor math that deals with all of these areas. And I'd suggest looking at other opportunities, what alternative distributors are out there, and how can I leverage some alternate distributors? And once I get some critical mass and the proper sales rate, work at going direct to retailers. Number two is an opportunity I'd keep in the front of my head that the retailer is your customer. They're the people that where the consumer goes through the store and picks up something and puts it in their basket and takes it home. They don't pick it up at a distributor. They don't pick it up at a direct customer's warehouse. They pick it up at the retailer, or the retailer brings it to your car. It's important to understand your indirect spending at a retailer. So if I'm selling Publix, as an example, through KE or through UNFI, I really need to know what my promotional plan is at Publix. What am I spending at Publix? Not what I'm spending at KE that I can, it's what am I spending at Publix? And the deals ought to be going whenever possible to Publix. It may come back through the distributor as a deduction, but I should be making my promotional deals with Publix directly. Pricing is performance. So if you have a deal and the deal is for a buy one, get one, you can say it's for a buy one, get one deal because you're predicating the deal on the volume that's associated with it. Your salespeople within these retailers need to be analysts. I hear constantly, we don't want our salespeople looking at, doing quote unquote, doing paperwork. I've worked with countless region managers, VPs of sales at companies that are 50 million and up. And the key strength of the good account managers, sales managers at those organizations is their ability to analyze the business and manage their trade spending and leveraging the information, which is critical. The third area I would look at addressing is your trade accruals. I'd look at managing those by promoted group by month. Your finance team should be accruing for trade, not dealing on cash-based accounting. It should be based on budgets, planned, committed, and actual performance. And the actual performance and the committed performance, again, should be validated with contracts. And your forecast should be continually revised. It's a forecast. The final point, I'd put in what I would refer to as fair and equitable. There are market rules. I'm not even going to get into, Robinson-Patman or anything like that. I don't think anybody's ever going to get it Robinson-Patman addressed with them. But there's, the market does a pretty good job of policing itself. And if retailers believe that you're giving more money to someone else and they feel they're entitled to it, you will be asked to justify what you give retailer by retailer. It's a fair question. And also keep in mind, just like on our side of the business, retailers move around all the time too, so they know what's going on at other retailers. So I think that as you grow, it's probably not, that big of a deal with an emerging brand, but as you grow, it's something that you should keep in the back of your head. Finally, a page of suggested action steps. What I would think about doing coming out of this, if I were a brand new brand, is I would look to get educated on trade promotion. It's continual knowledge development. It's important because it's either your number one or number two expense item on the cost side, side of your P&L. I develop clear trade objectives and strategies with measurements and KPIs. It's important that you determine ways to look at this. I'd ensure proper roles and responsibilities exist in your organization to execute your strategies. It's important to know who's doing what and who's accountable to do what. And if there's a void, how am I going to fill that void? So if I'm in a situation where sales can't handle everything we need sales to handle, we can't close our eyes real tight and hope they're going to do it. We're going to have to figure, you'd have to figure out how to either get some part-time help or fractional help or do something to get those issues addressed. I would develop my trade promotion process. I'd take that Chevron chart or something similar that you're comfortable with and put all the sub bullet points you need for your team below that in order to manage it the way that's right for your business. I'd align my reporting, my accruals, and my analysis around the KPIs I've laid out for our team. I'd develop retailer plans for profitable growth, improved effectiveness, and customer partnership. I think that those are the three things you need to think about as you work with your customers: is how do I grow with them profitably for me and profitably for them? How do I make every dollar of trade promotion work harder next year than it did this year? and how do my customers think of me as a better partner as I get into the next year? They may look like mutually exclusive goals, but I can tell you that they're all complementary and they all work together. And finally, you may need to add or integrate systems as necessary. As you go down the road, you may need to look at systems that you need to put together in order to manage this more effectively than you're currently doing today. And that's it.
Thank you, Fred. I really appreciate you being here today. That was very extensive and very thorough.
I'm hoping someone's still awake.
I think we haven't lost anybody really on the call. So we do have a few questions, which I'd like to take the last 10 to 12 minutes here for you to respond to. And I'm going to start with one. It was sort of a question I had. Somebody made it very specific, though. I think it was our friend Keaton. Are you saying that you should say no to the 15% OIs? Is that even allowed, an even allowed pushback? And I guess my question in general, could you share your thoughts on how much negotiating power with distributors, with retailers, with buyers that a brand can have, especially small brands like this? And if they don't, or if they can negotiate, what are some of the options that are in front of them? I think it's important for folks to understand how those conversations and be prepared for how those conversations might go.
So one of the things I've always asked people, totally apart from this, but just pretty much in any setting, is when that scenario comes up, is what's the worst thing that can happen? So you cut away the ROIs. Is the brand going to completely throw you out? Is the distributor going to completely throw you out? If the answer is yes, I would suggest you don't have a lot of equity with your retailers. That would be my first premise. And if the answer is yes, I would suggest taking a step back and wondering how much of a real business I do have. And do I want to think about reassessing a little bit of the go-to-market strategy? And I could tell, I'm actually working with a brand right now where the plan is, then there's a concern about that. And the idea is to pull back from the conventional distributors to some degree. And if the retailer won't leverage it staying in, then maybe you go back and you look at a non top two distributor. And there's some out there that are, I could talk to anybody that would like to offline about that, that have a very proactive and positive model for emerging brands, and build the business back in that fashion and do it in a way that you can address the retailers you want to partner with in the right fashion. I mean, if a brand, I would suggest that if you're a brand and you're totally at the mercy of a distributor, you have to look in the mirror and determine if you really have the equity to make that brand, how far you have the equity to make that brand go.
Okay. All right. Got a specific question here from another friend of ours, Mark Mandel. What's your opinion, or what do you think of the new UNFI SSI program, and how is that going to impact trade spend? Does it make more sense to reduce the spend with UNFI to allocate directly to retailers to offset some of the costs? So again, I think it's a little bit of a cost benefit analysis here, but what's your thoughts on that?
So I'll answer that again with a question back. How, and this is for something for everybody to think about. So this came out a month and a half ago. Obviously, when it came out, I'm not going to suggest that UNFI had all their leadership team sitting in a room saying, holy shit, how do we make life easier for all these small emerging brands that we've been taking advantage of, or, that taking advantage of is the wrong word, that we've been making sure we got every dollar we could possibly get from over the last couple of years. Let's give them all a break, get rid of all these fees and charge them 2%. And we'll just eat the difference. We all know that didn't happen, right? Secondly, I'm going to suggest that decisions like this are not, I don't think they sat in a room for 7 weeks and thought of the 400 possible scenarios that could happen and have a 4-step plan on how they're going to address each one. I think to some degree, they came up with it and said, it's a pretty good idea. This is what we're going to try. and we'll see what happens and we'll evolve it as we go. I happen to be old enough to remember when Crossroads was initiated at CNS, which is now kind of the partner distributor of all the distributors out there. CNS two or three decades ago was commonly known in the industry as cheat and steal. Okay, they know that. So I mean, there's nothing I'm saying out of school, right? I mean, that was what they were referred to as, and they came out with this program called Crossroads. The Crossroads program, 5 years after it started, looked very little, or 3 years after it started, looked very dissimilar from what they launched. It's something they're looking to do. And in fairness to UNFI, and I'm just going to oversimplify this, right? If you're a business that one of your key line items in your cost structure is diesel fuel, I'm not sure how you've survived over the last 4 years, right? I mean, that's a pretty significant cost line for a business over the course of the last 4 years. I mean, anybody can can Google the cost of diesel fuel since 2020, and it's a line that's going straight up. It's 60% higher than it was in 2020. So, I mean, I don't know that I overreact to it. I think I would look at 3 or 4 other areas where I could cut my costs there if they're going to deduct it and you haven't signed up for it. We've all been down that road before with distributors, right? It's how far do you want to push it and how far is it going to go? But if enough people complain, they'll probably change. But I go back to the answer to point 1, 2. There's alternatives out there. They may not be perfect today, but and you can't look for something that's perfect today. But if the model that some distributors are looking at continues to catch on, what typically happens? Somebody else will do it. It'll expand. It'll grow, and it can organically change the landscape. It happens all the time. A goofy. Nobody ever thought. I watched a History Channel thing the other Sunday night. Like nobody thought, and I was one, that Blockbuster would ever go away, right? I mean, that's all you did. Every Friday night you went to as goofy as it sounds, you went to Blockbuster and got movies and popcorn to watch with the kids. It was like a game changer at the time. Life changes.
Okay. Got another question here. I think maybe I'll rephrase it a little bit. But in general, can you give us some examples of companies, no names, please, but maybe types of companies that handle trade spend well and some that, that falter at it, and the reasons why? The question here was related more, I think, to perishable products, which I think, always have a different level of intensity. But can you think of some examples or stories from companies about managing trade spend that really allow them to fully gain the advantage of their trade spend? Tough question, I know.
Actually, I would say it's not that tough of a question. I'm trying to figure out the priority I would put it in, but most larger companies have a resource, if you will, that's referred to as a department referred to as trade marketing. The cool term now is revenue growth management. When you look at some of the Mondelez's and the larger manufacturers, but essentially it's still trade marketing, and it sits between sales, finance, marketing, and leadership, and it doesn't have line responsibility. However, it's really charged with driving the effectiveness of trade. So it does a lot of the analysis, and it pulls a lot of the switches internally to reallocate funds, to determine that what tactics are working and which ones aren't working. There's ways to do that if you're an emerging company. So I think that's the first piece. The second piece is, if you disagree that a primary role in an organization is to analyze, and to the point of analyze significantly trade spending, you need to have someone that does it. If it's not going to be sales, and it's not going to be the brokers, who is it going to be? It can't be finance, because they're not close enough to the customer. And that was really where trade marketing came from. So you either have to, if you're not going to have something with trade marketing, you're going to have to supplement it with an analytical sales organization. but there's no getting around that you need to analyze trade.
Okay. So, Fred, we only have a few minutes here left. I was just hoping maybe you could go right back to the beginning and say, here are the 4 things you need to be doing so that folks leave here, saying, okay, we heard a lot, but maybe if you could just reiterate, here's what you have to do to manage your trade.
Well, I actually tried to do that. Let me pop up here. I tried to do that in the last slide. So let me see if I can get to that quick. I would say read whatever you can and learn whatever you can learn about trade promotion. It's out there. It's a big deal. Learn what you can and ask questions. Secondly, I take a stab at developing trade objectives and strategies. What do you want to measure around trade? I listed in here, just something as simple as your cost per case. Your cost per case sold, or cost per, whatever, sleeve sold or pound sold, however you look at your business, some metric, and as a percent of gross revenue at a customer, whether that be direct or indirect. Again, we talked about this on a couple of the questions, but having the right roles and responsibilities to execute the strategy. I mean, you can't hold an organization accountable for something if nobody's accountable to do that work. I'd suggest having a process. Like, what's your process? As you're thinking about 2025, take those 5 steps, and what are you going to do with each step there? And what are you going to do? Who's going to do it? And when are they going to do it by? When's customer planning going to start? Who's going to do it? What customers are we going to plan at? And what's going to be in the all other bucket? And when's the dates? Same with execution. Who's executing these promotions? Here's the goals here's the plan by customer. Who's responsible to execute it? And when do they need to have the contracts that says this is confirmed back to who's ever keeping that file? Make sure that you're developing trade accruals starting in the beginning of 25, and if you can do it for 24, for the second half of 24. What am I planning to spend? Get all those plans together and put them into some sort of format that you can accrue for it. And again, when you're thinking about where to spend the money, to me, the people that are selling the product and pricing the product and that the consumers go to is where I'd be spending the money. I understand the challenges the distributors are facing, but I mean, I don't know that poor old big distributor that that's the people on this phone call's responsibility to make sure they can pay for their diesel fuel bill to the degree it's being paid for now. I mean, those are the key ones. And when you get down the road and you want to look at systems that, but that's across the organization, and that's something you probably put in a plan. That's part of your planning process somewhere.
Well, thank you, Fred. I wanted to make sure that folks walked away with those takeaways, that they saw them one more time. I really appreciate that. I appreciate you being here and everything you shared. This recording will be available, and
is it okay to say if anybody has a question, you can feel free to email me or contact me on LinkedIn?
I was just going to say that to reach Fred is Fred at Schroeder CPG.
Fred at Schroeder CPG, or I'm typically on LinkedIn. You can typically find me on LinkedIn. I'm not that hard to find there.
And if you need any questions have any questions about Brandjectory, it's Tom at Brandjectory.com. We're always happy to answer those questions. Fred will make these slides available to us, and we will share them with the folks that were here. And if you have any questions, as always, just reach out to us. So, Fred, thank you one more time. We appreciate everybody being here today. Have a great week. Have a nice long weekend. Again, health and wellness to everybody along the way. Take care.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fred.
Thanks for the time, Tom, and everybody. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye-bye.